On this Friday night, state of emergency. Ontario introduces new measures to end the protests. Will changing tactics be enough?
Nobody's seen a demonstration like this before.
Plus, the steps being taken to clear the border blockades.
You're hurting your neighbors. It's time to go home.
Rising tensions. The stark warning, leave Ukraine as the threat of the Russian invasion escalates. And Jamaican comeback. After a long and bumpy ride, the country's beloved bobsled team is back at the Olympics.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Eric Sorensen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin tonight with breaking news. An injunction has been granted to remove the protesters from the Ambassador Bridge. This comes after Ontario's Premier said he intends to enact an order that states that the occupations taking place in Ottawa and Windsor are illegal, a sentiment the Prime Minister has echoed.
The illegal blockades are hurting Canadians, whether they're in Ottawa, Windsor, Coutts, or Emerson. They're endangering jobs. They're threats to our economy and to public safety.
So, some form of intervention in Windsor now appears to be imminent. But as Sean O'Shea explains, it's unclear how any attempt to break up the protest will be received. Sean?
Eric, in the last 24 hours, police here have received backup from the Ontario Provincial Police and the RCMP. It's expected that if people occupying this area don't leave of their own accord, they'll be forced to. They've been here all week, protesters occupying the Canadian end of the Ambassador Bridge that links Windsor, Ontario with Detroit, Michigan. The actions of 100 or so protesters and their trucks have created an international crisis, and now their time is running short.
We've tried and tried and tried.
With Ontario declaring a state of emergency, police now have more powers.
The trade problems that we would see if we didn't clear the Ambassador Bridge would be unprecedented.
Businesses on both sides of the border have already cut production in factories.
This is the right to protest. If we can't protest, a bad government will do whatever they want against the people, and that's what they're doing now.
Police reinforced tighter restrictions on access to the site, yet protesters were freely allowed to bring gasoline and other fuel back to their vehicles where they've been living and sleeping.
What's wrong with fueling up the vehicle?
Police told us they can't stop the resupply effort. So will those occupying the bridge follow a court order to leave?
Will they follow an injunction that is illegal? Probably not.
I'm walking on the street.
I asked one protester whether an injunction would be followed.
But imagine, just like in any scenario, there might be someone who says, I don't like that, right? Or someone who shakes their fist at the sky. It doesn't mean violence.
And a question also likely being asked by police. Do the police have anything to worry about from the perspective of pushback, fight back, guns, resistance?
The only thing the police have to worry about is God's judgment on their actions.
Late this afternoon, the city of Windsor and the automakers got their wish. They got that court injunction requiring the protesters to leave tonight. Whether they go, that's still up in the air. Eric.
Sean O'Shea in Windsor, Ontario. Thanks, Sean. Despite the declaration of a state of emergency, the protests in Ottawa appear to be growing again. As Abigail Bimman tells us, the protesters do not appear to be fazed by the threat of consequences.
It's Friday, so more protesters fill downtown Ottawa ahead of the third weekend in a row. A DJ'd street dance party, porta potties in front of the Prime Minister's office, and camped out protesters, all under the Ontario Premier's new state of emergency.
There will be consequences for these actions, and they will be severe.
Doug Ford promising to protect against blocking infrastructure, including border crossings, airports, bridges, and roads.
Maximum penalty of $100,000 and up to a year imprisonment. We will also provide additional authority to consider taking away the personal and commercial licenses of anyone who doesn't comply.
And you're not afraid of a fine or an arrest or anything?
Nope. I've got my husband on speed dial in case he needs to pay bail.
None of the protesters we spoke to are fazed by a state of emergency.
I'm here for the long haul.
We're not going back doing any of that until all mandates are removed.
Freedom! Makes me want to stay more.
I'm tired of being told what to do, just like everybody else here. Freedom means freedom. If you don't understand it, dictionaries are available online for free.
Many frustrated by protests have long been calling for tougher action. On day 15, the state of emergency seems the biggest move so far.
It's my hope with the additional powers announced today and the new resources we are continuing to work on getting from our policing partners that we can bring a safer and swifter lawful end to the illegal demonstration.
While the city of Ottawa announced it will be seeking a court injunction.
Everything is on the table.
The Prime Minister says the, quote, unlawful activity will end.
I can't say too much more now as to exactly when or how this ends, because unfortunately we are concerned about violence.
As for whether Ottawa needs to call in the military to help, the Prime Minister says they're not seriously considering that right now, and it's something he'd like to avoid at all costs, but also that they have to be, quote, ready for any eventuality. Eric?
Abigail Bimman in Ottawa. Thank you, Abigail. The Toronto Police Department is gearing up to move protest vehicles out of the city if illegal demonstrations materialize this weekend. The police chief says peaceful protests are allowed, but not encampments or road blockades.
We have assets in place to make sure if people are, if vehicles are engaged and they're not moving, we're going to move them out of the way.
They say the priority is to keep emergency routes clear and protect key infrastructure. Several roads are closed and police are asking people to avoid the area. In the West, industry groups are warning a nearly 2-week-long blockade at the border crossing south of Coutts, Alberta, could soon have catastrophic impact on that province's economy. RCMP officers are ticketing protesters, but as Heather Yourex-West explains, farmers and manufacturers say a resolution is needed now.
Winter weather may have returned to southern Alberta, but protesters remain committed to their cause. For 2 weeks, the blockade at the Coutts border crossing has been mostly peaceful, but its impact on industry has been anything but.
We estimate that the impact on that is about $600 million over the last 2 weeks.
Very few of the protesters here in southern Alberta are commercial truckers. In fact, many of the people we have spoken with work in agriculture or oil and gas, industries that now say they are hurting because of this blockade.
If manufacturers can't provide the materials needed in oil and gas, then ultimately it's going to impact our biggest sector, which is the energy industry. It's days, not weeks, before we start to see shutdowns.
Alberta's cattle industry is hurting too. 80% of beef produced here is exported. It's why the president of the Canadian Cattlemen's Association is calling for the protest to end.
I believe it's gone too far now. It started to disrupt trade. It started to disrupt commerce.
There's people that lost their jobs because they would not take an experimental vaccine. So I just think it's time to share the pain.
At the end of the day, we're talking profits. But I think profits are not above freedom.
And so the protest continues as the blockade at Alberta's busiest border crossing enters week 3. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, near Milk River, Alberta.
The protests have largely been about COVID restrictions. Well, it looks like some changes are coming. The federal health minister said today the worst of the Omicron wave is behind us, and Ottawa could tweak travel restrictions by next week.
Our government is actively reviewing the measures in place at our borders, and we should be able to communicate changes on this next week.
The government currently advises against all non-essential trips outside this country. Those who do travel are subject to COVID-19 measures when they return, including testing. Chief Public Health Officer Dr. Theresa Tam says because Omicron is so infectious, it is too hard to stop every case at the border. Overseas, protesters in France are headed for Paris, inspired by the demonstrations in this country. Thousands of police officers and armored vehicles are positioned around the capital, waiting for the convoy. Gatherings are banned in Paris, but as Crystal Gomansing reports, many protesters there are also willing to risk the consequences.
The French Prime Minister warned anyone blocking the streets of Paris would be arrested. Keeping to that word, police and armored vehicles moved into place Friday as the so-called European Freedom Convoy was expected to arrive. Those in the French convoy and their supporters at locations outside of Paris appear unfazed, jovial even. When asked about the convoy and support for it, there are some common talking points.
Canadians, they kind of federate all the people, so that's why they're in Australia, in New Zealand, and now in Europe and in France. The people look at it, and I guess it really pushed them to go on the street.
The words Canadians, freedom, and fairer world are often cited. It's unclear if there's any coordination between all of the convoys. There is cross-promotion of different country events on the European social media page. The demonstrators call for freedom, but in France, many COVID-19 restrictions have been removed. Outdoor masking was dropped earlier this month, and by the end of February, there won't be any requirements indoors at bars or restaurants, although the vaccine passport will still be needed. I see that we've had significant loss of freedom in the past 2 years, and it's important that people mobilize. Those who have mobilized have so far been prevented from entering city limits. Crystal Gamansing, Global News, London.
A sharp warning from the White House tonight that a Russian invasion of Ukraine could happen at any moment. Canada joins several other nations today urging its citizens to leave Ukraine now. Top U.S. security officials have laid out what a Russian attack could look like, starting with an aerial bombing campaign. Jackson Prosco joins us now from Washington. Jackson, what more do we know tonight?
Hi, Eric. The White House insists that it does not believe Vladimir Putin has made a final decision on an invasion, but the tone today was unmistakable. President Biden's national security advisor told reporters that Russia is in position to mount a major military campaign any day now, and it could happen while the Olympics are still ongoing. In addition to urging Americans to leave within the next 24 to 48 hours, they warned no U.S. military personnel will step onto Ukrainian soil to assist with evacuating citizens in the event of an invasion. The U.S. Embassy continues its drawdown of staff, and there is growing concern that a bloody assault beginning with missiles and airstrikes and bombings could be the first salvo in any Russian attack.
It could take a range of different forms. But I want to be equally clear that one of those forms is a rapid assault on the city of Kyiv. That is a possible line of attack course of action that the Russian forces could choose to take.
Now tonight we're learning that the U.S. is ordering an additional 3,000 troops to Poland. That's on top of the nearly 2,000 dispatched there last week. They are not meant to fight Russia in Ukraine, but rather to deter any advance on NATO members. Today, there was an 80-minute-long phone call between the U.S., Canada, and European allies. The White House insists they're all united and ready to levy sanctions and other countermeasures against Vladimir Putin and his inner circle if needed. But Eric, officially, they aren't giving up on diplomacy yet, and the White House expects that President Biden will speak with Putin by phone this weekend.
Thanks, Jackson. Jackson Prosco in Washington tonight. Breaking rank from the Canadian Armed Forces. Coming up, the military officer being investigated for speaking out against pandemic mandates. Plus, the Olympics welcome back a fan favorite. Welcome back. A major in the Canadian Armed Forces is under investigation tonight for appearing in a video speaking about COVID-19 mandates. He is the latest military member to speak out. And as Ross Lord reports, the Canadian Forces says appropriate action will be taken.
It's almost unheard of for a serving member of the Canadian Armed Forces to speak out against government policy, especially like this.
Canadians have been lulled into believing that the same government who suppresses your freedoms in the name of safety will one day just reward you back with your freedoms.
Army Major Stephen Schladowski adopting a popular buzzword of those protesting COVID-19 rules and vaccines.
That, folks, is the very definition of tyranny.
Schladowski says he's served in the forces for almost 21 years, including in Canada's mission to Afghanistan. He also says he's unvaccinated, 4 months after DND ordered members to be fully vaxxed along with other public servants. Schladowski refused a Global News request for an interview. The Department of National Defense says it's investigating. DND says these are difficult and stressful times for our country, and the Canadian Armed Forces is not immune to these stressors. The department says discipline and being accountable to duly elected officials are crucial for military members, noting those who disregard these principles undermine the very foundation of our institution, and that anyone who brings discredit to the forces will be held accountable.
Can receive the
In his video, Schladowski urges other military and police members to oppose COVID-related policies. It comes as Canadian intelligence reports indicate far-right extremists are looking for ways to recruit soldiers and cops.
They know when to start conveying these types of messages within the military ranks to other potentially susceptible individuals. So it's problematic, and it's an incredibly difficult challenge.
Another layer of complexity at a time of widespread unrest. Ross Lord, Global News, Ottawa.
Securing the capital. Ahead, was Ottawa ever ready for a disruptive occupation?
You're watching Global National.
The protests over the last 2 weeks have tried tactics never seen before in Canada. Security was prepared to keep trucks away on Parliament Hill, but on the streets of the city and at border crossings, ordinary life was brought to a standstill. The question is, will authorities be better prepared next time? Because experts believe there will be a next time. The first miscalculation was thinking protesters would stay one weekend and leave. Instead, they turned their trucks into urban barricades, impossible to get by or ignore.
There was nothing that indicated that it would be this level of interference with the normal way of life.
Doug Kirkland managed security on Parliament Hill for years.
Nobody's seen a demonstration like this before.
At the center of government, always a potential target, security is constantly evolving. In 1989, a hijacked bus was driven onto the Hill. A few years later, a man ran his Jeep up the steps of Centre Block. 9/11 prompted still tighter security. Eventually, Parliament Hill was made off limits to all but official vehicles. That, at least, may have kept tractor trailers from steamrolling onto the Hill 2 weeks ago. But while Parliament Hill itself was spared, protesters sealed off the main thoroughfare, Wellington Street, with trucks. And more trucks came and more streets were blocked off, protesters choking off ordinary life in the city for thousands of residents, and not just for one day.
The protests have definitely created some new tactics that haven't been seen in Canada before, and I think that it's a tactic that we may see grow.
It didn't take long for other small groups to realize how easy it can be to gum up Canada's economic lifelines. But police learned too. In Toronto, traffic was steered away from Queen's Park. The optics of sticking a truck in the face of government deflected. In Ottawa, one response could be as simple as putting portable barricades in place sooner and further out to discourage big rigs from being used as big props. But the issue in the capital is also jurisdiction.
The bureaucracies, we certainly have them stacked up on top of each other.
Federal, municipal, 2 provincial governments, different police forces. It seems to take so long for authorities to get together to respond.
There's got to be a streamlined table. There has to be some kind of interrelationship that can be put together very quickly.
Out of this may come new laws that can be applied quickly with heavier penalties, restrictions which could boomerang on so-called freedom protests.
The irony of the protests is they're actually potentially going to limit freedoms in the long run.
Still, the protests unleashed new methods and discovered new streams of funding on social media. By any measure, one small group showed just what is possible in Canada.
It may set a tone for what's to come, but this was the first.
Still ahead, back on track. The Jamaican bobsled team is making a comeback decades after defying Olympic odds. There's a cloud of controversy in Beijing tonight over one of the biggest stars in one of the biggest events. She is Kamila Valieva, the 15-year-old figure skating sensation from Russia. She tested positive for a banned substance before the Olympics, but it was only revealed after she led Russia to a gold medal in the team event. Now, the Court of Arbitration will decide her fate, whether she can compete in the upcoming singles final, and whether Canada will move up from 4th place to a bronze medal in that team event. Well, one of the feel-good stories at the first Winter Games in Canada 34 years ago was the debut of the 4-man bobsled team from Jamaica, of all places. Well, they're coming back to the 2022 Olympics. And as Jamie Dahl reports, the sprinters who first took to the ice are watching closely.
They were the underdogs from a tropical island nation, blazing an icy trail for future winter athletes to come.
Have never seen snow, let alone a bobsleigh track.
The world instantly fell in love with the Jamaican bobsled team when they debuted at the 1988 Olympics in Calgary.
Jamaica's athletes have been stealing the spotlight in Calgary.
My mom doesn't exactly know what it is, but she's, go ahead, enjoy yourself, have a nice time.
This thing was way bigger than just 4 guys from Jamaica trying to bobsled. It was saying to people all over the world who had dreams that they thought may be scary or too big or seemed ridiculous and impossible, and other people telling them, I think it gave them permission to go pursue those dreams themselves.
And now, after a 24-year absence, Jamaica's 4-man bobsleigh team is headed back to the track in Beijing.
It's about time.
Calgary's Lascelles Brown has competed at the Olympics for both Canada and Jamaica.
Yeah, I think Jamaica have some really good athletes, and putting it together and getting them back on track, like that's nice to see. If the Jamaican boys finish in the top 10, that's an accomplishment.
You bring that Jamaican flair to the games, you know, and that makes it a pretty cool event. I just encourage them to enjoy the moment, man, because it's one of those very rare experiences that so few of us get to enjoy in life.
That famous movie made about the '88 team helped preserve the significance of the Jamaican bobsled team's legacy. Regardless of how they do in China, you can bet the world will be watching every heart-stopping turn. Jamie Dahl, Global News, Calgary.
It's not always about winning the gold. And that is Global National for this Friday night. I'm Eric Sorensen. Tonight's Your Canada is a seal lounging in Newfoundland and Labrador's Green Bay. There are beautiful spots all over this country. Please email yours to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching.